you get spending in line with expected revenues. The reason that we're in a budget crisis for the last 2 years, fiscal 16 and 17, is because the governor and his people overestimated the revenue, period. That's it. It was about 500 million last year, and it's pointing to 350 million this year. I argued with he and his people this year before they came with a top line revenue estimate. Listen, we had a little over $3.8 billion come in fiscal year 16 against a 4.3 estimate. Any rational person would say, okay, 3.8 billion is a good starting point as we put together our fiscal 17 budget, and maybe if we're in a little bit of a downward trend, we might even reduce that. But instead, the first number that came out of the governor's office was 4.3 billion. We ended up settling at 4.1 billion, and there was a cigarette tax which takes 100 million out of that. So arguably, it's a $4 billion top line, in spite of the fact that the real number is 4.1. We just paid for 100 of it with the cigarette tax. And I'll add, that is the governor's cigarette tax. Yes, the legislature had to approve it, but the first budget that came up had 3 taxes in it, and we pushed back pretty hard on that. So you solve it, number one. Well, it's solved completely if you just properly estimate revenue. But that's it. It's as simple as that. Now the rest of the heavy lift comes in, how do you cut state government enough to match those numbers up? But we do constitutionally have to deliver a balanced budget, and that says you match your spending to your revenue. Will I work very hard every single day to increase the top line? You betcha. I mean, that's our real way out of this is by putting West Virginians to work, by either creating an environment that is conducive to the job creator that already exists here and lets that person expand employment, or and bringing in attracting outside business to come in here and invest. The gift could be a resurgence in coal or natural gas. That's the one that we don't have to do anything but collect more money on a monthly basis. But and then as we get into the budget, we have other budget issues. That's the only budget.
That's the only one.
But I'm going to take just a minute if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
And talk through the budget. The legislature was, many on the other side of the aisle tried to get us a black eye in the legislature for not being able to deliver a budget, but we didn't have much of a chance. When you have general session, and then historically there's always been a 3-day special session right after to bring the budget together between the House and the Senate. And the reason there is you got to drop the gavel on the last day to know what bills passed and then what effect they may have on the top line, whether it costs money or makes money. So, and historically, the governor has delivered that adjustment letter to the 2 finance committees on the first day of the 3-day extraordinary session. This time he waited till the 3rd day, and it was 11 o'clock in the morning on the 3rd day, and he delivered the news that we were $92.4 million extra short. So I immediately went to him. I said, we need to extend. I mean, that was, to me, that's news he had for at least 2 weeks or 4 weeks. He could have delivered it to the respective finance committees and let them have time to work through it and figure out what they're going to do. Or he could have sat on that news for 1 more day, accepted a balanced budget from the legislature and said, oops, we're missing $92.4 million. We'll call you back in the special session and we'll deal with it that way. But he chose to wait till the 3rd day with 13 hours to go. And I went to him, I said, you got to extend this. And he said, no, if you don't have a plan, I won't do it. We'll call you in the special session. So that was politics, fellas. That was a gotcha moment. And I understand it's election year. I'm not mad. I hate to take a lot of abuse for something that truly wasn't our fault. But I've had a good working relationship with the governor, and we got through it. So, but you say, okay, we have a $4 billion budget. It should be very easy to find the $270 million that we were looking for to deliver fiscal year 17. But here it is, just in real quick, easy math. Let's call the budget $4 billion. $2 billion is public ed. Well, everybody says, oh, you can't cut education. We're getting a 46th, 48th place student achievement right this minute. It's hard to argue that we need to cut. We got a lot of work to do there. I'm assuming there's an education question here. But all right, so half of the budget is K-12, public ed. $1 billion of it is the federal matches, the Medicare, Medicaid. You don't walk away from your obligations, number one, or you walk away from 75-25 money coming from the feds. So $1 billion is off. That leaves us $1 billion. $400 million of the $1 billion is higher ed. Oh, we can't cut higher ed. It's too important to West Virginia. Now we're down to $600 million. We were looking for almost $300 million. Everybody says, well, it ought to be real easy. We're looking at $600 million as truly the place that you have to cut. What's in the $600 million? PEIA, the Promise Scholarship, state police. Go ahead and pick one, because we're going to whack them in half. I mean, it just isn't as easy as what people would want to believe that it is. The real place that we have to cut state government is through the executive branch, because there's a real lack of transparency in how the budgeting process works. This is a general revenue budget, but there's special revenue in the executive branch within the agencies of state government in order to match our spending to our actual income.
Can I get clarification?
Please.
Okay, so the general fund budget doesn't include state personnel?
It does, but there's so many things that are funded. In other words, there's not a line item for buying vehicles in the general revenue budget.
Okay.
That happens because the different agencies have funding from different sources, and they go buy them. I mean, you've seen the reports. We're trying to figure out why we have apparently a 7,000 vehicle fleet. I mean, if you do the math, that's about one car for every 4.5 employees.
Okay, what is the budget, not counting education? Because you said $2 billion for education, which is half. Okay.
Public ed, yeah.
So what is the budget for state manpower other than education?
Well, I mean, it's all the agencies. It's all the thousands of people that.
Does that come
Run
out
state
600
government.
million you're talking about though, what's left?
No,
Okay.
no. Well, it does some, because there is, when we do across the board cuts, the different state agencies do feel the pinch when we do a 5% or 10% across the board cut. All I'm saying is a great deal of their revenue comes from outside the general revenue budget. So they got funding from different areas, but all I'm saying, look, even if it's transparent, let's say you cut the cost. Let's just say it's if you're looking at highways, you can call it waste, you can call it fraud, you can call it corruption. All the above fit at different places in that agency. But if all of a sudden you manage to cut just by running it better, you don't lose a person, you run it better, all of a sudden the money in their account starts to come up. Now you've identified, you've sort of connected the dots. Now we can repatriate that money, we can skim that money off to bring in this $350 million budget shortfall that we have now. But I'd rather just fund them with the right amount of money to start with, and that's where you that's where you connect the dots on that. That's where you match spending to actual revenue. You know, but you know, and as I look at those programs, I look at state government, we always historically, you know, I say we. I've been in leadership for 2 years. I'm not taking credit for it, but it's still we. I'm in it now. We measure compliance. Never do we measure results. We fund programs because they've been there forever. They filled out the right amount of reports. They had the right amount of meetings. They did whatever it took to justify being there again. And it didn't zero base. We don't go back to zero and say justify all the money you're getting. They say, well, we got $20 million last year, and well, it cost 11, you know, we need $21 million this year, and that's how the process works. I'd rather say, justify every dollar you get from zero, and just like we do in business, and justify how much you need then, and let's see what kind of case you make. But if we really measure results, we truly measure results, I think we're gonna find a lot of state programs and parts of state agencies that could be real easy to say goodbye to.
Cut to the chase, do you think you can trim enough out of the budget, and we'll just leave budget as the entire budget, to offset the shortfall?
I am still outside looking in, and until you sit in that seat, you don't know for sure. I can tell you what I know from being the Senate president. I cannot tell you what the perspective is within the executive branch. If it's possible to cut it, to right size, to reform, to reshape, to remold, you betcha that's what we're gonna do. But at the end of the day, I said at the beginning, we have a constitutional obligation to balance a budget, and I don't know if you can walk in there in one day or 1 month and find all those savings. So I cannot. The unasked part of your question is, are tax increases on the table? If that's what it takes to get this done, it's the last thing I want to do. I'm a fiscal conservative, but we have an obligation to operate our state government, and I intend to do just that.